Welcome to Scary Production, your gateway to the most spine-chilling horror stories and unnerving tales. Dive into a world of darkness where every shadow hides a secret and every whisper tells a haunting story. From ghostly encounters to unsolved mysteries, we bring you the finest in horror content designed to keep you on the edge of your seat. Are you ready to face your fears? Subscribe now, and let the terror begin. The Haunting of Devika, Shadows of the Ancients. What if I told you there are places where the lines between the living and the dead blur, where ancient spirits never truly leave? This is the story of Devika, a young girl whose life was forever changed by the darkness that lurks in the forgotten corners of her village. In a remote village in southern India, nestled among lush forests and towering mountains, lived a girl named Devika. The village was like many others, with thatched roofs, narrow dirt roads, and an air of timelessness. But beneath its peaceful exterior, there was a history buried deep, a history that many villagers preferred to forget. Devika was 15, with long black hair that flowed like a river down her back, and eyes that seemed to hold the mysteries of the world. She was a bright, curious girl, known for her love of stories and her knack for asking questions that often made the elders uncomfortable. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village, Devika's grandmother, Alma, called her inside. "The nights are getting longer, Devika," Alma warned, her voice tinged with unease. "You mustn't wander off after dark. There are things in these forests, things better left undisturbed." Devika had heard the warnings before, but she couldn't help herself. The stories of the old forest, of the spirits that roamed there, fascinated her. She would often sneak out at night, just beyond the edge of the village, to listen to the sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the distant calls of night creatures, and sometimes, if she was very still, the faintest whispers of something she couldn't quite make out. But this night was different. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of earth and decay. The trees, usually so full of life, seemed to loom over her, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes. As she stood at the edge of the forest, a chill ran down her spine, and for the first time, she hesitated. "Go back," a voice seemed to whisper, carried on the wind. But Devika shook off the feeling. She was drawn to the forest, compelled by a force she couldn't explain. She stepped forward, the ground soft beneath her feet, the shadows growing deeper with each step. The further she went, the quieter it became, until the only sound was the pounding of her heart. Then, she heard it, a low, guttural sound, like a growl, coming from deep within the forest. Devika froze, her breath caught in her throat. The sound grew louder, closer, until it was all around her. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet shifted, as if something was moving just below the surface. She looked down, her eyes widening in terror as she saw the earth begin to ripple and bubble, as if boiling. A foul stench filled the air, and she gagged, stumbling backward. In the distance, she saw something move, an indistinct shape, dark and menacing, slithering between the trees. It was coming toward her, and with every step it took, the shadows seemed to grow thicker, the air colder. Devika turned and ran, her heart racing. The forest, which had once been so familiar, now seemed to twist and turn, the path she knew so well now foreign and labyrinthine. She could feel it behind her, closing in, the darkness pressing against her, suffocating. She burst through the trees, back into the village, her breath ragged, her body trembling. But the village she returned to wasn't the one she had left. The houses were crumbling, the walls cracked and weathered. The once vibrant fields were barren, the crops withered and dead. There was no sign of life, no children playing, no elders sitting by the fire, no animals roaming the streets. Devika called out, her voice echoing through the empty streets, but there was no answer. The village was deserted, as if everyone had simply vanished. And then she saw them, shadows moving in the corners of her vision, flickering in and out of existence. They were watching her, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, their forms shifting and amorphous. Panicking, she ran to her home, hoping to find Alma, to find some sign of life. But when she reached the door, she found it ajar, the wood rotting, the hinges creaking as it swung open. Inside, the house was dark, the air thick with dust and the scent of decay. The furniture was overturned, the walls covered in strange symbols, scratched into the wood with a sharp object. And there, in the center of the room, was Amma. But it wasn't her Amma. The figure before her was twisted and deformed, its skin pale and sagging, its eyes hollow and black. It grinned at her, a grotesque smile that sent a wave of nausea through her. Devika, it rasped, its voice distorted, echoing as if coming from deep within a cave. You shouldn't have come back. Devika backed away, her heart pounding in her chest, tears streaming down her face. She turned to run, but the door slammed shut, trapping her inside. The shadows closed in, wrapping around her, pulling her down into the darkness. She screamed, a blood-curdling cry that echoed through the empty village, but there was no one to hear. In the days that followed, the villagers searched for Devika, combing through the forest and the fields, but she was never found. The village, once vibrant and full of life, fell into disrepair, the fields barren, the houses abandoned. And the forest grew darker, the shadows longer. The villagers whispered of a curse, of a darkness that had been awakened by the curiosity of a young girl. They spoke of spirits, of ancient forces that should never have been disturbed. Years passed, and the village was forgotten, left to be reclaimed by the forest. But sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind was still, you could hear the faintest whispers carried on the breeze, the voice of a young girl, calling out from the darkness, lost forever in the shadows of the ancients. And if you listened closely, if you dared to venture into the forest, you might just see her, a flicker of movement in the corner of your eye, a shadow that doesn't quite belong. But be warned, for those who see her never return, swallowed by the darkness that claimed Devika, trapped forever in the haunting of a village that time forgot.